The purpose of Wealth Talk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. WealthBuilders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Welcome to episode 67 of Wealth Talk. My name's Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, and I'm joined this morning by our founder, Mr. Kevin Whelan. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Chris. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And we've got an exciting episode today, haven't we?
Yeah, we've got a fantastic guest today. It's Mr. Daniel Priestley, the co-founder and CEO of Dent Global. And, Daniel's a great guy. We both really admire the work that he's done. And certainly, he's very much at the forefront, I think, of the entrepreneurial revolution. In fact, he authored the book of that very title as well.
I mean, I think I resonate particularly with Daniel for many reasons. And I think both of us would claim in some way to be thought leaders and visionaries. And I think he's got very, very insightful things to say. And as always, when you hear what people have to say, hear the integrity of Daniel here. He's not self-servingly, pushing a message. He's just saying, look, being in business is tough, but if you do it the right way and you follow some of the right lessons, it can be, you can be very, very, very powerful. And he gives some brilliant insights on how to create wealth in what he calls a sort of an ecosystem, which is a brilliant term, I think, for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel's company, Dent, has been running for 15 years now, and they run accelerators across the world. And I think that's another message to be picked up today is about, the age that we're in now is to start thinking about being a global business, or certainly how your business could serve, anyone across the world.
Absolutely. And it gives a very interesting insight into how we pivoted from that, wasn't it, in terms of aiming for sort of cities into time zones. And that gives you a much bigger insight. Anyway, I don't want to steal any of Daniel's thunder. Why don't we have a listen to what Daniel has to say?
Sure. Let's head on over now to the conversation with Daniel Priestley. Hey, Daniel, welcome to Wealth Talk.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
No, very welcome, Daniel. Always a pleasure to speak to you. And there's a lot that I'd love to cover with you today, but I think the primary focus will be on looking at how you can really create an ecosystem of assets within your business. And I know you're familiar with our 7 pillars model. And of course, your first book, KPI, you talk about, the 5 Ps. And I think there's elements of business, intellectual property, joint ventures all rolled into that, which of course are the 4 entrepreneurial pillars that we talk about.
Yeah, so it's a really good fit. Looking at the way that you guys have structured things, it's kind of like if a red Ferrari drives past, a lot of people will say, oh, there's a red Ferrari or a red sports car. So clearly we've noticed the same things from different angles.
Yeah, definitely. So before we really dive into things, Daniel, for anyone who perhaps hasn't had the pleasure of, reading your books, hearing you speak, would you mind just giving us a little bit of your background, your entrepreneurial story?
Yeah, so I'm from Australia. I grew up on a place called the Sunshine Coast, which is as horrible as it sounds. It's just beaches and forests and endless sunshine all the time. So I kind of did retirement living before I started my career, and then did everything backwards. But basically, at age 19, I dropped out of university, became employee number 3 or 4 within a startup. The startup went really well. I worked for an exceptional entrepreneur who took us from an idea to 6 million in revenue and 60 employees in under 2 years. And that gave me an incredible opportunity to see what it's actually like to start a business and to be an entrepreneur without taking any real risks other than, kind of being involved in a startup. And then 2 years in, I decided that I wanted to go and do my own startup. So I was 21, 22 years old. I left that business, started my own. And it also became a very fast growth startup. So I'd learned a lot in my time with John. And I built a business that went from 0 to about 10.7 million in sales in about 3 or 4 years. So before the age of 25, we were up to about $1 million a month in revenue. And it was just a great fast roller coaster. Fast forward a few years, I ended up moving to London and getting out of that business and basically launching a business accelerator. So I started a business accelerator called the Key Person of Influence Accelerator. and in a company called Dent Global. We now have 3,000 clients globally. We have offices in Toronto, Sydney, London, we have a great time incubating and accelerating entrepreneurs all over the world. And then in amongst that, I wrote 4 books on entrepreneurship based on the lessons that I was learning.
Yeah, and having fun along the way, which I know is one of your key values as well.
Been having a lot of fun along the way, and also in the last 6 years, been having 3 children under 6. So having a lot of sleepless nights as well.
Yeah. And you talk often, Daniel, about the entrepreneur's journey. Of course, it's vital to really know kind of where you're going from the beginning and to understand that there's different stages, as you eloquently put in your entrepreneurial model. So can you maybe just give people an idea of what those are?
Yeah, for sure. So, people always ask the question, if you could go back and give your younger self some advice, what advice would you give? And that question is based on the idea that over time, over decades, we form a view of the world, a more complete view of the world, a map, I guess you'd say. And if only you had the map sooner, you'd do better in life. So entrepreneurship's a little bit like that. And I've been really fortunate. When you work with 3,000 entrepreneurs ranging from early stage startups right up into the billions of revenue, you actually get a very clear picture of what the map ends up looking like. And therefore, it's a lot easier to build businesses very rapidly, multi-million-pound businesses very, very rapidly. So there's a few key stages. There's obviously the startup phase where you're getting the concept right and you're doing validation. There's a phase called the wilderness, which is first contact with the marketplace to see if your ideas survive. Then there's the boutique phase, which is 3 to 12 employees or 3 to 12 people on the team. And what you're trying to do is establish a boutique that punches well above its weight. You want a boutique where 3 to 12 people are really kind of making some waves and disrupting things and gaining influence. If you can get up to 12 people, you enter a very difficult phase, which is crossing the desert. And the desert I describe as too big to be small, too small to be big. And it's between 13 and 40 people. And this is a difficult phase where the business is no longer this kind of self-managing small boutique, but it's also not ready to have a leadership team and, expensive software and expensive offices and all the kind of things that you need to run a proper business, a bigger business. So you kind of in this weird no man's land of not small, not big, from 13 to 40 people, which doesn't sound like a big jump, but actually when you're in it, it's a huge jump that lasts a couple of years often. And then you then basically enter a new phase of business, which is scaling from about 40 to 120 people, where there's another little desert in there as well, where you kind of have to go through it again. But essentially, there's these key phases that you go through. And if you don't know these phases, sometimes the horrible thing that can happen is that you can have a wonderful business that's just doing so well at 12 people. And then you go 13, 14, 15, 16 people. You get up to 16 before you realize that you actually needed to do a lot more planning than you thought in order to go past 12. So those kind of things kind of creep in. And when you know the map, you know what to expect.
Yeah, that's great. And you've been saying, Daniel, for at least the last 5 years that there's a big wave coming and that entrepreneurs need to start paddling and be ready for this. Now, we're just coming out of, obviously, the coronavirus period. It's the end of June now. We're recording this. And would you say this wave has now arrived?
Coronavirus was the shock. In fact, there's been several shocks in the 2020s. We started in January with the prospect of World War III, and then we had the Australian fires. There's been all sorts of very strange, kind of things that were going on in the 2020s. But then coronavirus was that global shock to the system. It's kind of like if you saw a house that is full of barrels of petrol, you might not know exactly what's going to set them on fire. But you know that it's probably going to set on fire eventually. So what I saw 5 years ago, there's a number of fundamental shifts that dictate the future is going to be turbulent or different, and that it'll take a shock to set it all off. I don't know what the shock is going to be, but there will be a shock, and I kind of knew it would happen around the 2020s, where something would kick it all off. So the way, if we can kind of sideline, and then I'll come back to the question, if that's all right. The way you can see into the future, there's two great tools for seeing into the future. And the first tool is demographics. So when you understand that there are pockets of the population that are very big, large groups within the population, one of them is the baby boomers and one of them is the millennials. So the rule with demographics is that people roughly do predictable things at predictable ages in their life. So in your 20s, it's fairly predictable that you're going to be fairly self-centered, setting yourself up. You'll probably be into music, going out partying, meeting someone new. You know, all of those things are predictable in your 20s. In your 30s, it moves more into family, you know, having a wedding perhaps, getting your first house, maybe having your first child. And then in your 40s, it's very much focused around career and earning as much as you can, paying for those school fees perhaps, or getting a bigger house and you know, all of that kind of stuff. So one of the things that I knew would happen is that the vast majority of baby boomers will be in their 70s or be turning 70 in the 2020s. It starts off it starts off in 2016, but then it really explodes from 2020 onwards, that the vast majority of baby boomers, that big generation that gave us the Beatlemania and, you know, kind of all sorts of trends, is going to be moving into 70 plus. Now at 70 plus, people sell down their assets. They get rid of big homes and get smaller homes. They go traveling. They become obsessed with healthcare, early diagnosis. All of those kind of things are normal for someone in their 70s. They're very focused about spending time with family and grandkids and enjoying healthful years. So that's that's a huge percentage of the population moving into that. The millennials moving into career focus, looking for putting down some roots, not traveling so much crazy time, and just being more focused on family and career and getting really focused. So those things, I knew those were happening. I know the millennials are massively in debt, though, more so than any other generation in history. I know that property prices are multiples higher than the baby boomers paid for their properties. So percentage of revenue, percentage of property price versus income is out of whack. So those things are demographic trends that you can draw upon. And then the second crystal ball that you have into the future is technology. And the rule with technology for understanding what's going to happen next is the S-curve. And essentially, that when a technology hits about 20% adoption, it's halfway to 80% adoption. so that you can find technologies that have kind of gone up to about 20% market penetration, and you'll start to see that they really take off. So that you can kind of have a look at what's going on and look for the disruptive trends that are happening. And there are certain big technologies that are deliberately pushed and rolled out. So every 10 years we get a different generation of phone technology. So 4G was rolled out in 2010, 3G was rolled out in 2000s, 2G was in the 90s. So essentially we were due for 5G technology, which is an order of magnitude faster and more advanced than 4G. And facilitates all sorts of, transformational technology and automation. So all of that was converging upon the 2020s, the demographic trends and the technology trends, which is why I was describing one hell of a wave is coming. It's going to be massively disrupted. Now, in answer to your question, it's only just arrived. So you're either going to be surfing this wave or being dumped by this wave for several years.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, Daniel, we've spoken previously in the past, with Escape the Rat Race and the shift from employee to entrepreneur. So would you say now more than ever, certainly the millennials, right, I'm sure are thinking more about being business owners, straight out of school, then they're not going through that traditional education system that the older generations have done. But even obviously people, in their middle ages are now looking at the security that a job can provide and obviously being quite worried about that and looking at other opportunities and in how can you make that shift over to a business owner, start thinking like an entrepreneur. Are you seeing that shift just accelerating as well?
It's definitely accelerating. And my first book was Entrepreneur Revolution, which was around, the fact that we're all going to end up as entrepreneurs and we're all going to have to make that shift. So entrepreneurship has always been really hard and difficult and terrible, and a slap in the face and a punch in the nose and risky and exhausting and all of those kind of things. But it's always had a higher potential for upside. It's always had the potential for freedom and the potential for abundance and creativity and all of that baked into it. The problem was that up until recently, there was an extremely good alternative to entrepreneurship. So you had to kind of weigh up, do I want to be an entrepreneur, or do I want a good, stable, solid job that just pays the bills? And I can get a decent mortgage. I can pay off the mortgage. I can take a holiday each year. I've got stability. I know that my job is going to be around for many years. So essentially, people had to weigh up the two options. And in many cases, for really rational reasons, people would choose to have a good job. However, as we've gotten further and further away from that reality being true for many people, there's hardly anyone who would describe their job in those terms anymore. Even when we hear about these concepts of full employment, someone who's driving an Uber on an effective rate of £8 an hour is classed as having full employment and a full-time job. That is not someone who's got job security or anything like that. So because of weighing up the two options and weighing up the alternative, there is no real alternative now. Like, you have to be if you want any chance of owning a home, if you want any chance of having fun and freedom and making the most of the times that we're in, and the ability to kind of change and pivot and get the most out of life, most rational people are saying, well, there's really no choice. I need to kind of either be on an entrepreneurial team where I'm kind of bought in and I've got equity, or I've got an opportunity, or I need to go and start my own. But there is no kind of big, stable, safe job waiting in the wings.
Yeah. And that's such a key point. I remember you mentioned that before to me, is that one of the most, I guess, sensible ideas of when you're thinking about making that shift is not to just suddenly go out there on your own and say, hey, I'm going to start up my new venture, but it's to take that step into a team of others who have already got some of that traction, that experience. And I've experienced that myself, right? It just makes such a difference. It's such a better way of approaching things, isn't it?
Yeah, there's 40,000 companies in the UK that are fast growing, already got a small team. They've got traction. They're winning awards. They're ready for scale. They're ready. They're classed as being scale up ready, and they're already got traction and they're growing. One of the best things you could possibly do is get yourself onto one of those teams for 2 years at a minimum, where you'll actually have an experience of. It's kind of like, if you wanted to play tennis, playing tennis with a professional tennis player for a couple of years is probably going to be the thing that totally gets you a great game.
Yeah. Now, passion is important, but I know, listening to 24 Assets, one of your great books as well, Daniel, you talk about, obviously, within a business, you can create an ecosystem of products and different IP, really, I guess, which just gives you that, I guess, peace of mind, security, allows you to grow. And a key thing that we talk about in Wealth Builders is recurring income, because otherwise you're not really, getting out of that time for money trap if you're not having assets within your business that can generate that recurring income. So can we look perhaps at some of the different ways that you can start to build that ecosystem? And I know you've got different categories as well within those 24.
Yeah. So the term recurring income is describing the byproduct of an asset. So this recurring income is the symptom of owning an asset. It's what accidentally happens after owning an asset. So if you own a big house and you rent it out, you've got recurring income. If you write a book that sells every year and it's a perennial bestseller, then you have recurring income because you created an IP asset. So recurring income is the output. It's the symptom of an asset. An asset is anything that would still retain its value if you weren't around, if you were paying very little attention to it. And what we need to look at now is a new class of assets. So we need to look at this new class of asset called digital assets. So in the agricultural age, the number one type of asset was farming land. And then industrial age came along and farming land was less important. And it was actually industrial land, industrial factories, actually, that was the primary asset. That if you could organize labor under one roof, then that was the number one asset. In fact, owning a mill, owning machinery, owning a sewing factory would be a much better thing than owning land. And it might only take up a very small amount of land. And then as we move from the industrial age into the digital age, we need to own digital assets. So it almost doesn't matter whether you own a factory anymore. It matters that you own the brand. So you look at businesses like Nike, they don't own factories. They outsource to different factories. They own the brand. They own the soft assets. So the new assets, it still follows the same rule that an asset is something that would provide value if you weren't around or looking after it. But think about things like this. A database. Let's say you've got 100,000 names who know who you are and open your emails. That's one hell of a digital asset. If you said that you have, if you've won a really difficult award, let's at an extreme level, an Olympic gold medal, that award places you as someone who has a soft asset for life, for the rest of your life, which is about excellence and achievement at the highest level. So that asset will continually bring you opportunities because you're an Olympic gold medalist. But in business, there are all sorts of awards that have that same impact, and that is actually an asset. An award is an asset. Let's say you've got an incredible culture where people would love to come and work in your organization because of the type of workplace that you run. That's an asset. It's a different kind of asset that it's hard for us to think about it through our industrial brain. We've all grown up in the industrial age, and now we're living in the digital age. But having a workplace culture that attracts highly talented and skilled people is an incredible asset. So what we need to do is build this ecosystem of assets. Often they're digital assets. We formalize them into media, software, and intellectual property. And once you formalize them into media, software, and intellectual property, you suddenly have this ability to have a business that takes on a life of its own.
And you have a scorecard as well for 24 assets, don't you? So if someone's listening now, if they're an existing business owner and they're thinking, well, where do I begin, right? How do I turn from my kind of traditional business to start thinking? Yeah. The scorecard's probably a good place.
24assets.com is a great place because there are 24 of these assets and it scores you as to what you've got, but also gives you a description of each of the 24 assets. Like what are some of the things you could go off and build?
Yeah. And someone who hasn't started a business yet, any of those assets, ones that you would say are absolute essentials that you need to have in place almost as your rocks, your foundation?
For someone who's not started a business, we don't get them thinking about assets too soon. We think about influence first. So the ability to go out and actually have the ability to make some sales, the ability to recruit one or two people onto the team. But it's kind of like the gears in the car. If you start your car in fourth gear because you've seen someone driving really fast in fourth gear, you'll stall your engine. You actually need to start off in first gear. So first gear we talk about is having a good concept, knowing who your audience is and being able to go and attract the audience and get their attention, putting together a great offer that people want to buy and that really speaks to their needs and their wants, and then being able to sell it, actually sit down and have a face-to-face sales meeting or a Zoom sales meeting and actually make a sale. Those are the first four things. And essentially, one of the dangerous things you could do in the early stages is try to formalize assets too soon. And you're formalizing the wrong assets. You're spending all your time and all your money on stuff that pays off over years when you haven't even proven whether the business can last for weeks.
Yeah. So staying lean at the beginning.
Staying very lean at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I guess one of the assets you've touched on there, Daniel, is writing a book. You've written, seen a new book even on your Facebook feed now coming with the Entrepreneurial Kids, which looks really interesting. But how many books in total so far for you?
I've written 4 main books in the series, in the Entrepreneur Journey series, and I've co-authored 3 books where I've worked with a co-author to kind of produce a book, which is How to Raise Entrepreneurial Kids is with Jody Cook. So the two of us are working on that together.
Yeah, well, this is a topic that we've touched on many times, Daniel. And it's always been, I found it curious because I've heard, many very influential business owners, entrepreneurs, wanting to make a big change and shake up the educational system. I've never seen it kind of really take grip, though. Why do you think that is? And how can this change, and how can entrepreneurs be the change of this?
Yeah, well, you've got to remember the educational system goes back to the 1800s. So changing the direction of a steam ship, a massive freight train or something like that is very difficult. No one person is going to do it based on desire or even just seeing quite clearly that it needs to change. It's a one hell of a moving object. So it's going to take decades to change an educational system in a meaningful way. But it does have to change, and there has to be changes. But I really think that change begins with parents. Parents have to get in there and become coaches and mentors to their kids, and or at least get them in front of coaches and mentors. And it's important. The distinction about that book is that it's not about creating kids who are entrepreneurs. It's about creating entrepreneurial kids. And there's a slight distinction. We're not trying to push kids into business or get them to have the stress and the pressure and the obligations that go along with business. But it's just having an entrepreneurial mindset and having an entrepreneurial awareness, having some kind of some of the entrepreneurial principles, like being able to pivot or spot an opportunity or make a good pitch. Those are those kind of skills that are going to be built and be very valuable later in life. But having a good pitch could be pitching for a puppy. You might want a dog. So rather than just saying yes, getting your kids to put together a pitch presentation, getting them to forecast forward, and using words like, can you do a forecast of the next 2 years as to who's going to walk the dog and who's going to look after the dog and all those kind of things? Can we use PowerPoint or Keynote to actually put together a presentation around this? And then can you sit us down and actually take us through the presentation so that we understand what it is that you want and why that would add value to the family? So inbuilt in wanting a dog is an opportunity to create a pitch deck. And that's an entrepreneurial skill. Now, it's not forcing a child to be entrepreneurial. It's not forcing them into business, but it's giving them an entrepreneurial skill.
Yeah, and dare say the children teaching the parent a few things along the way as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's funny,
creating a TikTok account.
During the lockdown period, of course, it's almost been an enforced homeschooling for many parents. So, I guess this is something that was already rapidly growing, is homeschooling, and maybe more so now after this enforced period.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents are discovering that there's all sorts of resources that they had no idea were available. Khan Academy and certain apps. And there's actually the other thing that's incredible at the moment is that school teachers are so poorly paid for what they do that it only takes 3 or 4 families to put in a small amount of money, and they can actually match or improve a school teacher's pay, and they can end up with a very good homeschooling situation.
Yeah. So Daniel, I guess just to kind of round off the conversation we've had today about, looking at the business pillar, which is obviously one of our 7 pillars of wealth. And then we've talked about within the business pillar, there being this ecosystem of assets as well. With regards to business, over the next 5 years, where do you see your business going? Where are the kind of directions that you're getting excited about now?
Yeah, so so in the next 5 years, as I've described, there's a wave, and you're either surfing it or you're getting dumped by it. So surfing it is about having a vision for the future, and then reverse engineering that vision and reverse engineering that future. And it's about embracing the times that we're in. So it's about embracing technology and trends, and not being stuck on the way we did things in the 2010s or the 2000s, but actually being kind of like curious and open to how things might change for the better. In the 2010s, we were obsessed with the idea of building a business in 20 cities, and we were up to about 7 or 8, or not. We were up to 8, I think, when COVID hit, and it was this kind of global, pandemic, and suddenly all 8 cities, globally, were rethinking that model. And then we realized, hey, wait a second, a lot of the ideas that we had in the 2010s about how we might build this business are no longer valid, or there's a better option. So we moved to a time zone model where we actually said we're just going to have 3 consolidated offices that cover the 3 major time zones, and we're going to deliver the entrepreneurial experience and the IP on the time zone using all the tools and technology and resources available. And we're going to bring together several technologies that creates an exciting environment for someone to really learn and develop their business. So within 3 months, we made the shift from 8 cities back to 3 time zones. We're loving it. It's a much better model. Our business has actually grown substantially as a result. We've reorganized our team structure around that. The other thing that excites me going forward is data. So, the way you can use data to create incredibly personalized experiences. And, you don't have to do one size fits all, or even the closest size fits all. You can have a perfect solution that fits each person if you've got enough data and the ability to process that. So, for example, you mentioned the scorecard. 24 Assets asks a series of questions, and then we can custom build a solution for someone based on how they answer those questions. We can actually custom build their business growth journey so that they're doing the right thing at the right time. So the use of data and the ability to process that data is really exciting. I've just co-founded a new company called ScoreApp that allows companies to actually harness a lot more data through running scorecards and quizzes with their clients, then process that data and have more powerful conversations with their customers as a result.
Yeah. And the important thing not to forget with all of this technology is business at the end of the day is person to person. And so this data is, just helping you to really understand your customer and serve them better.
Think about it like this. The reason your best friend is your best friend is because you have a lot of data on them. So it's, the fact that you have a really close relationship is a data problem. And then the way you utilize that data and the way you express that data back to people. But it's very hard to be best friends with someone if you have no data on them. If you don't know what their favorite food is or their favorite music or or that joke that we told a year ago that's still funny. If you don't have that data, then it's very hard to be a best friend. So when companies think about data and they use it as a way to get further away from customers and kind of like put a barrier in between people, then they're doing the completely wrong thing. The purpose of data is intimacy. It's the ability to say the exact right thing at the right time. It's the ability to provide the right solution that's perfectly fitted. It's the ability to be a much closer ally as opposed to, kind of being a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah. We've provided some great insights today, Daniel, and you always do within your Facebook group as well. The Oversubscribed, Reset and Reinvent is a great group. So anyone who isn't in there, I definitely highly encourage you to go and join that. But where else can people head to, Daniel, to kind of follow you and find out what else you got going on?
So most people read the books. There's Entrepreneur Revolution and then Key Person of Influence, Oversubscribed, and 24 Assets. If anyone wants to drop our office an email, we can actually just send you a free copy of Key Person of Influence because we have that as one of our marketing promotions and kind of just happy to give it out. So info@dent.global. And just say, I'd really like a book, please. And our team will pick that up. And if you give us the mailing address, then we can send it straight out. Yeah.
Cool. No, that's awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you again today, Daniel.
Likewise, Christian. Thanks for having me.
So very interesting there. And Daniel, certainly in his book, 24 Assets, talks about obviously the ecosystem that you can create within a business. And of course, we have our own 7 pillars model. So maybe we can touch on, Kevin, some of the differences between, I guess, some of those assets that maybe sit within a business or under the IP pillar as we refer to them.
Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge, I think it's a great idea to be encouraging business owners to be thinking about the power of some of the things that maybe they'll take for granted in their business, and referring to them as an ecosystem is quite powerful because there's an interdependency, isn't there, on things like, your brand, your database, awards you could make, the culture of your company, software, IP, scorecards. He raises really, I think what a very insightful point, that in the modern technological age, you can create the potential for more assets. And I think I'm going to make a difference. So, Daniel said at the beginning that, his connection with WealthBuilders is we see the same things from slightly different angles. So it's always good. And I love the fact that people have different angles, because the insights you get from people with a slight twist, a slight take on things can help you decide what's right for you. So where Daniel and I agree is on this concept of the ecosystem. I think it's a very good, where perhaps, we might have a slight difference, not of opinion, but just of the angle, is many of the things that he refers to. For example, he says that recurring income is a byproduct of owning assets. And I would say that's true, but for many people, they've got the potential of the asset. In other words, they might own an asset, or they might have the potential to create an asset, but they fail to capitalize on it. So it turns from a latent asset into an income generating asset. You've got to do something with it. You see the difference, Chris? You could have a database, but you could fail to capitalize on it because you don't nurture it well. You could have very strong software, but you fail to create the niche market that develops into a recurring income program. You could have great relationships with clients, but you don't craft a membership or a proposal that delivers the value back to the business in that recurring way. So I think we're saying the same things, but I just delved a little bit deeper into that. And I see many people undervalue their assets. And we know this from the conventional pillars, don't we? People undervalue their home, they undervalue their pension, they undervalue their IP for sure. So many examples where people could own an asset, but they fail to turn it into the recurring income that is truly wealth building.
Yeah. And we're actually going through that very stage with our members in the 7 Steps to Wealth program at the moment, is looking at a very distinction between those 3 traditional assets, which are the home capacity, pensions, investments, and the switch over to the 4 entrepreneurial assets. And, I guess Daniel was talking with a focus more on the business and IP pillars today, but I know in your presentations, Kevin, you have a slide which often shows business owners very, very focused on just their business, but then you zoom out and actually show all 7 pillars together. And it's really, you're in the business of wealth, which is what you say often.
And I think what Daniel's done actually has helped me because, I talk about most business owners, like my dad, had tunnel vision. Their eyes are, focused squarely on the day-to-day of what happens inside their business. And I guess that's the same with people in jobs, right? They're committed to that time. So their heads down, they're putting their effort into creating whatever they can in their business and in their job. But often that sort of blinkered look, that tunnel vision, fails to spot the weakness in the trap that lies therein, which is this trading time for money or trading activities for money. It can be quite a devastating outcome when something goes wrong. And we know that financial independence means the independence from a single source of income, which is why we believe so passionately in creating multiple streams of recurring income. But I think what Daniel's done is actually helped me think a little more about business owners and say, well, okay, I'm trying to get them to focus on their world outside of the business and almost see their wealth as their business, not the activity of the business itself. But what Daniel's saying, I think, is, well, dive further into the business and see if you can create powerful assets inside the business so the business itself can create streams of income for you. And I think that's a very powerful distinction.
Yeah. And one thing that Daniel spoke about is really having that map. He talked about the distinct stages that every business goes through, beginning with the startup, where you really you've got an idea, and then moving into wilderness, where you're testing and validating that idea. And then the boutique stage, which is between 3 and 12 people. And often that's where many businesses, are happy to stay, because you can create a pretty good lifestyle at that without then moving on to that massive performance stage, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to show a map, and I think he makes a great point that, a map or a plan is always better than randomly kind of arriving at things. And what my experience is with maps, certainly on the Wealth Builder map that we've created, Chris, the 7 Steps to Wealth, is the sooner you get the map, the better it is. It's almost like you're in wealth, you're charting new territory. Well, it's hard to do that. Why not just follow a path that's already been laid down? So it's just so much easier to do it that way. And I think he's making some great distinctions about thinking about where you are in your business and kind of understanding that you're moving from one path to another, or one level to another rather. And that whenever you move to another level, if you don't understand it, whatever got you successful at level A is not likely to get you to the success at level B. So, obviously I don't know the language as clearly as Daniel does for his own distinctions there, but good ones, aren't they, really? So if you want to scale it, you're going to have to let go of a lot more in order to create the power for scale. Whereas in the boutique style of business, you're much more focused about your lifestyle. And we spend a lot of time at Wealth Builders helping directors understand how they can draw money from their business, the DRAW that I spoke about on the last podcast, Chris, the director's pension, relevant life, building assets outside of the business, and well-being. So many ways that a boutique business owner can create a fabulous lifestyle with much of it coming from basically tax deductions. So, very powerful thing there. But of course, if you then want to scale it, you've got to think outside of your lifestyle. And maybe that's when you get to life-changing sums of money, when you can sell your business for multi-millions. And we've definitely seen that. But it takes a different process altogether, doesn't it?
Mm. And one of the things I didn't actually touch on with Daniel, but I know he's a big fan of, is wealth dynamics. We talked about wealth dynamics a lot. And for anyone who's, looking at either growing or even getting into business, we talked about that transition of so many people who are employed now having to almost think entrepreneurially if they really want to have, the success and the wealth that they desire. And knowing your wealth dynamic, knowing where your value is created and how you can deliver that to be in flow is one of the best ways. And so Daniel talked again about making that shift, joining an entrepreneurial team, being surrounded by like-minded people. And of course, we say that connection is, one of the key elements of wealth building.
Nicely said, Chris. And I think in addition to that, Daniel focuses on a lot there, didn't he, on the concept of adding value wherever you are. In the way that I would frame that is, I think he talked about, one of the best things you could do is go and work for a business for a couple of years, but rather than take the risk at the beginning. And I think that's very powerful. I think from our perspective at Wealth Builders, we would say that everybody should focus on being a value creator, whether you're an employee or in business, and seek to almost imagine you're on a team like a sports person, and play to the best of your ability on a team until it's logical then for you to move on to the next team. And I love the example of the value creation for kids, pitching for a dog. Yeah, I mean, I got pitched for a dog with my kids, and I said no, but everybody else said yes, so I voted.
Yeah, you're pleased you made that decision now.
Oh, absolutely. I love our dog now, and I'm a keen dog walker at the weekend with him, and love it. But originally, I saw the problems. Somebody else is going to end up doing it, not the kids. And as it happens, that's exactly what happened. But my wife loves it, and I love it, and the kids love him. So no, it's a very powerful thing though, to create value and to give young people the skill to be thinking about value creation at whatever level they are. And I think it's a good skill to have in life, irrespective of where you try to create your value.
Mm. And of course, there's so much more value within Daniel's books. So for anyone listening now who, hasn't read any of those books or, maybe seen some other videos that Daniel does regularly online, definitely do go and check those out. He talks about one of the scorecards, 24assets.com. And he offered very kindly as well a copy of his book, KPI, for anyone. So the email address, if anyone didn't catch that, is info@dent.global.
Yeah, I'm sure you can put a link in the show notes, Chris, because, KPI is a seminal book. It's a great, great book, Key Person of Influence. And that focuses very much on, creating almost a stream of assets in your personal approach, in terms of being able to create partnerships, to be able to pitch, to be able to create a product, a whole range of different things that he calls the 5 Ps in there. And a great book. And I would encourage anybody who wants to add value in the world to read that book.
Well, it feels like we've touched on a subject today, which there's more that we can talk about. I'm sure we can invite some more guests who, pull out, obviously, that value that's often hidden right under our noses, whether that's in a business or just in our life in general. So it's been a good conversation today, Kevin. Thank you.
No problem, Chris. And until the next time we do a podcast, see ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the WealthBuilders membership site to help you create, build and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.